Hello there. Welcome to the episode 5 of A Beginner's Guide to Storytelling. I know it has been a long wait since we last came up with the episodes of when, why, and what of storytelling. My thousand apologies for that. But as you know, the world around us has changed so rapidly, so drastically in such less time. The way you shop, the way you work, even the way you date has just changed overnight. What will never perhaps change is the classic structure of a story, and that is what this session is all about. This classic structure has been depicted as complex as this or as simple as that. Some call it story spine or a three-act narrative or a skeleton. But since this is a beginner's guide to storytelling, so as a fellow beginner, I will make it as simple as a 4-step process for you. And we are going to name it, no copyright, we are going to name it a story curve. For me, a story is a living entity. It pulsates the same way a human heart does. If you go to a hospital, an ECG machine, if shows a flat line, it indicates a loss of life. The same way, a story will have its ups and downs, its extraordinary twists and turns, and it will be anything but a flat line. And that is why I call it a story curve and not a story line. Now that you know how this curve looks like, any familiar term that comes to mind? Exactly. It is perhaps a simple sine wave graph with two small straight lines at the either end of it. Well, this is all that you have to remember in life from now on about a story structure. What, you want more? Well, now that you asked for it, let's go deeper. Let's mark the 4 distinct areas on this graph as context, conflict, resolution, and conclusion. The first part on this curve, we call it as context. This is all about introducing the status quo or life in general. The time, the place, the people, the main characters, their reasons, their motivations, everything. This may be tiny 10-20% part of the entire story space, but in my opinion, this is the most vital part of the entire story. This is where I believe a truly great story is made or spoiled. Let's understand with a few classic examples. Do you remember in movie Godfather that long and somewhat boring opening sequence of Don Corleone's daughter's marriage? Or in the book as well as movie Lord of the Rings, that long, beautiful sequence of Frodo Baggins's life at Shire? Or in the movie Lagan, the 2 painfully long hours of life in general about Bhuvan, Lakha, Baga, Goli, Kachra and all those memorable characters? Understood that long and painfully boring at times, but this is where I feel that eventual match against the Britishers in movie Lagan, or the unique and complex personality of Don Corleone in Godfather, or the journey and eventual battle that the Fellowship of the Ring faces in Lord of the Rings, this all makes sense. It all becomes relatable and personal. We feel the same joy, sorrow, pain, anger, frustration, every single feeling that our main characters face. And that is, my friends, is the power of right context. Conversely speaking, so what happens if a storyteller fails to put enough emphasis on the context? Let's understand that also with a small example. And this is a painful example. Do you remember those days you could go to a cinema hall, the theater? Well, have you ever been late to a movie in theater? Like 30 minutes late about? Have you ever been late to a movie where you didn't know any actors beforehand? And God forbid, if this was a movie like Inception or Interstellar, wouldn't you feel like asking your friend who arrived right on time to watch right from the Vico Vajranti ads? Dude, who's the hero? What's going on? What has happened so far? Who is a villain? Why are they running all together? So, point here is, as a storyteller as well as an audience, the context is where the emotional connect happens, which is, of course, the foundation of the storytelling as an experience. And this is where my suggestion to all you storytellers: don't be miser in using this space for setting up the context. And if you do so, it will be at your own peril. The second part on the story curve, or rather the meteor part, we call it as conflict. We also know it as a problem statement or main point of the story. This is where the life in general takes a sudden upward turn and things start getting heated up. This is also where an internal or an external intervention happens and the life is suddenly chaotic. The life in general for our main characters, now it is not the same anymore, and that is the reason for the conflict. A good story may have a layered conflict where, because of a particular intervention, things spiral out of control. And the higher they go, the more emotional contact, the more emotional connect we feel with this story. By higher, I don't mean to say it has to be a world-ending kind of event. It doesn't have to be Avengers Infinity Wars altogether. My favorite story on this example is the movie Lunchbox. Do you remember what the point was of the story? It was about a beautiful relationship blossoming between two people over a lunchbox who had not even seen each other's faces. And this was certainly not a world-ending event, but because of layered conflict rising, we invested ourselves so much that by the end, we were hooked to know how this will all end. And this is where conflict leverages on the context we have just set. Let's explore what the next part is. Well, of course, no rocket science. If there is a conflict, there has to be its resolution. Otherwise, story is not going to be with a fulfilling ending. So the conflict rises upward, and it rises and rises until there is a solution which presents itself. The solution may come in the form of the main protagonist realizing his purpose in life, or finding his inner strength, or maybe the Gandalf the Grey arriving with a cavalry to rescue our main heroes. So the point is, the conflict can take shape of a person, a group of people, a society, a situation, a country, or a community altogether. And likewise, the resolution can also come from a person, a coincidence, a conscious efforts which has been in the making. About the coincidental resolutions, be very careful in using them as the resolution, because at times the audience may feel like they got cheated. Remember some of those mindless Bollywood comedies where the heroes are just hanging from a rope near a cliff, and suddenly there is some kind of coincidence happens and they get rescued, and audience is like, what the bleep just happened? That's the same kind of feeling I'm advising you to avoid dishing out to your audience when you use the coincidence as a resolution. Well, we will explain all of that and we will explore everything in great detail in the coming episodes. But for now, just remember, the more involved the conflict, the more satisfactory, the more fulfilling the resolution. And now comes often ignored, but kind of a cherry on top of the cake, conclusion. Conclusion is not the climax per se. The climax is where your resolution takes its final steps. But remember the curve, it goes upwards and it smoothens out. But there is also, just like life in general in the beginning, life in general afterwards. You can compare that to "and they lived happily ever after," that kind of ending. But the point there is, the Avengers Infinity War didn't end with climax of Iron Man flicking his fingers and restoring everything back to life. It ended with a fulfilling and fitting finale of his funeral, where everyone came together and our eyes were wet, and Captain America got to live his entire missed out life with Peggy Carter. Point here again remains the same. It doesn't feel fulfilling just at the stroke of climax. There has to be something hand just to complete that curve, and that completion part is what I call as conclusion. There are stories where this part entails a philosophical discussion at the end. Sometimes it also involves moral of the story. This is where education meets entertainment. This is where personal stories become truly motivational in the generic sense. And this is where speech writers and speakers focus. This is where you get to end with an impact. And that is the difference between neck-to-neck fighters and the one who emerges out as the winner. So what we discussed today, let's have a recap of that. The story curve or the story structure is all about these four distinct parts tied together on a simple, easy to remember 4 steps. This and this. This is all about the story curve that you have to remember, a simple sine curve. The first and the most important part, the context. This is where your who, when, and where are set up. Then comes the why part. Why there is a problem in the story. Why this entire story is being told. That why part is your conflict. The higher, the more invested the conflict becomes, the more pleasing, more fulfilling the solution is going to be. But for now, this is the why part of your story. If this is why, the resolution has to be the how part, how the story, the conflict of the story got resolved. And at the end comes back again the what part. What is the conclusion? How the story unfolds as the changed status quo. Remember, there is a status quo life in general at the beginning. There is a life in general at the end. And somewhere in between that, the entire story happens. So obviously, this life in general and this life in general, there is a slight difference. This is where the characters, the protagonists have traversed through the journey, and this is where their lives, their experiences have become richer, and they are having a changed life in general. So point here remains, don't just have a problem and a solution, invest a little in the context setting in the beginning, and never forget to cap it off with the conclusion at the end. And that is how you have a complete story with maybe 80% in the middle, but 10-20% at the slightly either edges as well. We'll discuss each one of these four parts in great detail with enough juicy examples in the coming episodes. But for now, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment your views about this video and the videos in the past. Keep sharing with your friends and families and your fellow storytellers in making. Keep watching the Beginner's Guide to Storytelling.